For the most updated version of the Glyphs RPG blueprint, tokens, accessories and resources, please visit www.glyphsrpg.com. Also visit 2ddice.com for our internationally popular D20 RPG coins and our other masterful coin works.
Hi, this is Charlie Smith again, and welcome to Chapter 6 of the Glyphs RPG Blueprint. Today we're going to be talking about techniques. So, what exactly is a technique? Okay, well basically a technique is simply a fancy way of naming a feat or a special skill or combat training that essentially allows the character to operate in ways that maximize its mobility, its attack patterns, or even the chances of success in using a skill in that type of encounter. Okay, now in Glyphs we look at techniques in three different categories. We have warfare, martial arts, and soft skills. Okay, so what that means is that techniques are restricted to a certain number of archetypes, and we'll see why that is. Now, the neat thing about techniques is that there's no additional token slide requirement in order to use it. Okay, so unlike with other things that we do here, so they should just be treated as fancy combat maneuvers, or in some cases skill boosters. Okay, now what's really cool about techniques is that they can be stacked in conjunction with other techniques that are compatible for the situation. Okay, and they can be used during the same instant in time during your attempt. And they can be triggered in conjunction with a combat action or a skill set challenge. So there's a lot of freedom and flexibility that technique can be used for. So technique, in short, is a really fancy move. It's a strategic move, or it's an extra boost you need to have an extra shot at making a skill work. That's essentially what a technique is. Now, in techniques, we do have some rules to follow. Now let's take a look at that real quick. So on page 103, okay, you'll see some of the descriptions that I just went over, and here are the basic rules that apply to techniques. So anytime you go to use a technique, okay, it always must originate from the action grid's G point. So that big G logo that we use, okay, that's where it needs to originate from, because its impact, there's a lot more impact that it can do in battle, so that's why we do that. Now, by default, one token slide is necessary for the technique to be executed, and it must land within the circle. Okay, so zones 1 through 9, that big black circle, that's where the token must land in order for the technique to work. Okay, now if you're an architect that is enforcing the comfort rules that we'll talk about later, okay, characters who are uncomfortable need to make an additional token slide for it to work, and characters who are overwhelmed need to make 2 additional token slides for it to work. Okay, so if you're using those rules, then that would apply. Now, okay, techniques, they can definitely enhance or substitute individual action attempts. Okay, now one thing about techniques, similar to powers, okay, they consume ether points when they're used. Okay, so just something to consider to basically makes them more valuable in combat. So use them wisely, because ether is somewhat limited until you regain it. So makes it a little bit more strategic, I guess you could say. Now, one really important note about techniques, because you may have a lot of players trying different things out there. Okay, characters who attempt to create and execute a technique on the fly, or just make up a special move, or they want to make up their own technique in the middle of a fight and just try something, or they want to imitate somebody else's technique, then basically that person is very untrained for that move, because they're just making it up or copying it on the fly, and that requires 3 consecutive token slides into the action grid from the G point in order for it to work. So the threshold, if you're just going to make it up on the fly, essentially is a lot higher, but you want to give folks the opportunity to do it. So that is their opportunity, I guess you could say. Now, if for some reason they are able to do it, then and it falls under their archetype's domain, then and it is successful, then basically they have ownership of that technique. They've essentially learned that technique, and the experience they get is 0 by default, and then they can build it from there. So now, one optional rule here at the bottom here, if you are using the timed rules, okay, unless your house rules dictate otherwise, individual technique token slides must be done within 5 seconds. So again, I rarely ever use the timed rules, but it is there for your convenience. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit more about the specific techniques, okay? The first class of techniques that we're going to talk about real quick are the warfare techniques. Now, those are specifically restricted to characters derived from the warrior, the rogue, the butcher, or the outlander archetype. So any character derived from those class archetypes is eligible to use the warfare techniques, okay? So warfare techniques are basically designed to boost improvement on the battlefield in intense situations like that. So there's multiple pages of warfare techniques. I'm not going to read every one of them, okay? Not time efficient, but let's just look at a couple examples. So here we have gun runner. So what does that do exactly? Okay, so in the description you'll see that the character has the freedom to move simultaneously an X amount of feet while attacking with a ranged weapon. So simultaneously move and shoot your opponent. Okay, so suppressive fire attempts and so forth. So here you'll see the effects here in a more condensed format. You'll see how long the technique lasts. In this case it's 1 instant. And the ether consumption, the EP, is 5 in this case. And some of these have prerequisites. In this case there is no prerequisite on Gunrunner, but some techniques do have prerequisite techniques in order to be able to have that technique. Unless the architect doesn't seem to mind, then that's fine too. But just note that here on the components in the technique descriptions. Okay? So we have several pages of warfare techniques. Now we're going to talk about martial arts. Martial arts are really cool because they can do a lot of neat things to boost the fighters' their combat ability in close quarters and make them virtually invincible, really. So as you'll see here, martial arts are specifically restricted to the fighter archetype. Okay, reason being, fighter is very restricted on what kind of armor and weapons he can have, but we want him to be as dangerous as possible, we want him to use his body as a weapon. So that is what we're trying to reflect here. So as an example, okay, you have several pages of martial arts techniques to look through. So build your fighting character, build your fighter however you want to. This gives you a lot of options to work with. So if your character's a puncher or a kicker, maybe your character likes to grapple or gouge or is into internal martial arts. There's a lot of different combinations you can choose from with the defaults, or as I always say, create your own from scratch. But there's a lot to work with here in this section. Okay? So as an example, let's take a look at the kicking technique. So what does the kicking technique do when it's activated? So basically it just makes kicks more effective when making a focus attack with a kick. So damage is increased, and the kicks are faster and they're more accurate. So the effect is tier 1 of damage and +1 token slide when making a focus attack, with a kicking attack. So very neat technique. A lot of these are very similar, so just look through them and experiment with them at your leisure. And it's got the ether requirements here and so forth. Okay, next we have several pages of techniques here. And finally we have soft skills. Now soft skills are specifically intended to give your supportive archetypes an extra boost. Okay, so here we have the scholar, the administrator, and the engineer archetype who are eligible to use soft skills. So basically all they are skill boosters. They give you different opportunities to succeed in different skill set challenges generally. So they're broken down by category here. We got a few pages of those. Okay, so they're broken down different types of skills, different types of exclusive skills or lifestyle skills. So just take a look through here and get familiar with them. Okay, these are going to be very important, especially if you're somebody who's going to be playing having a heavy party full of supportive type characters, okay? Because your role as a supportive archetype is going to be to help boost the rest of the party. So get familiar with these techniques and have fun and experiment. And we'll see you on the next chapter.